Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we are going to start with our writer, with our novelist Daniel Defoe. So today we are going to deal with the father of the English novel. Before that, as usual, I will ask you about the previous lecture. So I will give you some questions about the elements of the novel. You remember we have taken 3 elements last time: setting, theme, and plot. Let me ask you something about the setting. Tell me the answer of this question or complete the following statement. The setting of the 18th century novels was supernatural setting, such as castles and palaces, or it was natural setting like common people's houses. Which one of these 2 choices? Yes, that's right. So the setting of the 18th century novels was a kind of natural or normal setting like common people houses. What are the elements of setting? Who can tell me the components or elements of setting? We have 4, you remember. Place, that's right. Another one, time, social environment, and the last one, yes, again, we have place, time, social environment. You remember the 4th one, which talks about temperature, storm, rain. Yes, that's right, the weather. Again, the 4 elements: place, time, social environment, and the weather. The setting establishes what kind for the novel? Background or foreground? The setting is a kind of what? Foreground. You remember we said something about picture. The setting is a kind of, yes, that's right, the background for the novel. What are the functions of the theme? You remember the theme, which is the central idea or the subject or the conclusion of the novel. We have functions for the theme. Who can tell me the functions of the theme? Yes, the first function, it adds more experience for the reader. Second one, it gives the novel universal aspect. And the third function, it reveals the views of the novelist. We can conclude the views of the novelist from the theme. Another question. If I ask you to complete the following: the theme which is discovered by the reader himself without the help of the novelist is called what? Covert or overt? Implicit or explicit? Which one of these? Yes, right, the covert theme. So it's a kind of theme which is covered. The plot of novels in the 18th century was moving. The plots in the 18th century, all the plots, or generally we can put a generalization for this, a general idea about plots in the 18th century. We can say the plot or plots in general were moving quickly or slowly. Which one of these? Slow moving or fast moving? Yes, that's right, slow moving. What are the stages of traditional plot? You remember we have taken 4 stages for a traditional plot. The first stage, which is a kind of introduction, it is called, yes, the exposition stage. The second one, Yes, struggle, and we can see the conflicts of characters. It's called complications stage. The third one, the top of the action or the plot, it is called the climax or the peak. And the last one, which is the resolution. So we have 4 stages for the traditional plot. We have exposition stage and complications stage, climax and resolution. These are the 4 stages of plot. Now let's start our topic for today. We have Daniel Defoe, the father of the English novel. Now let's start with his early life. Daniel Defoe was born in London. The date of his birth is uncertain. It is said that he was born in 1660. Daniel Defoe was the son of James Defoe. It was not Defoe, it was Defoe. His father was a middle-class merchant. He later changed his name to Daniel Defoe to sound like a gentleman. So he changed his name to achieve his individualism, to be more aristocratic. His mother died when he was about 10 years old. When he was a boy, Defoe witnessed 2 of the greatest disasters of the 17th century. So we have 2 disasters during his life. The first one, the Great Plague in 1665. This plague killed hundreds of thousands of people in London. It killed around 50% of London's population. So we have a lot of dead people during this plague. It's a kind of disease. The second one, the Great Fire of London. There was a great fire in London in 1666. You remember that his date of birth, he was born in 1660. So he was around 5 to 6 years when he saw these disasters. These disasters killed thousands of people. They made Defoe's imagination wider in his writing. There was a great impact of these disasters on the writing of Defoe. He was brilliant in describing how his characters could manage and survive when facing problems, since he himself experienced that. So he lived during these disasters and he could describe such events. Defoe was a good student. Later he was forbidden to enter into Oxford or Cambridge because of his attitudes towards Christianity. This affected his writing, where he wrote about this religious discrimination. It was expressed in Robinson Crusoe. We are going to see the religious discrimination and the religious impact on his writing, especially, you remember, we are going to analyze Robinson Crusoe. His business. Now let's have a look on his business. In 1683, Defoe became a traveling salesman. He traveled a lot to meet the needs of his trade and business. He went to France, Holland, Spain, Germany, Italy, and other countries. So he was a kind of traveler. He was interested in traveling. Remember that we said that traveling could achieve individualism for a lot of people in the 18th century. It is clear in his writing where most of his heroes were travelers, such as Robinson Crusoe and Moll Flanders, where both characters traveled away from England and changed their lives. So most of his heroes and heroines are travelers. We have Robinson Crusoe, Moll of Flanders, and other novels. We are going to see the impact of this aspect of his life. So, we have Robinson Crusoe, Moll of Flanders, where both characters traveled away from England and changed their lives. Defoe spoke 6 languages. His business failed and left him with large debts of more than £17,000. He was a merchant tradesman, as we said, who faced a lot of difficulties in his business. He underwent success and failure in his business. So he was sometimes successful in his business, and sometimes he was not successful at all. He failed. He became bankrupt without any penny, without any money, bankrupt in 1692. After 4 years, he stood up again and became the manager of a tile factory. So after 4 years only, he stood again and became a manager of his own factory. After that, he was ruined in 1703. Defoe and politics. So we have seen his early life, his business. Now let's see Defoe and politics. Defoe was interested in politics. He was involved in the rebellion against King James II in 1685. He joined the army of William of Orange when William of Orange was crowned in 1688. So we can see he joined the army of William of Orange when William of Orange was crowned in 1688 in the Glorious Revolution, where he replaced James II. Defoe became one of his close men and a secret agent. So he was a kind of political person. He was a secret agent for the king himself. He supported King William of Orange and defended the actions of him through his writing. For example, his most popular poem, The True-Born Englishman. This poem focused on racial discrimination. So we have a kind of discrimination between races. A person who came from France was different from a person who came from another country. A person who was born in England was superior than the person who was born in France. This is called racial discrimination. So we have a kind of this theme in this poem. We have racial discrimination in England, where a lot of English people were looking at King William as a foreigner. King William died and Queen Anne became the ruler of England in 1702. As a result of his political views, he was put into prison in the same year. Defoe expresses his experience when he says in the School of Affliction, we can say this is a kind of his opinion, and we can say, or we can conclude from this quotation some meaning about his life. In the School of Affliction, I have learned more philosophy than at the academy. So real life, you can learn in real life more than in the academy. Sometimes you can learn a lot of philosophy from normal life, and more definitely than from the pulpit. In prison, I have learned to know that liberty doesn't consist in open doors. So again, in prison, he was in prison for 3 or 2 or 3 years, around 3 years. I have learned to know that liberty doesn't consist in open doors, and the free egress and regress of locomotion I have seen the rough side of the world as well as the smooth, and have in less than half a year tasted the difference between the closest of a king and the dungeon of Newgate. So he experienced both sides of life. Comfortable side, and we have anguish side, full of tiresome and terror. So we have from this quotation, he was the closest person to the king. After that, he was put in a prison for some time. After he was released from prison, he became careful in his writing. So after his release from prison, he became very careful in his writing. There was a deep relationship between writing and politics. Writers at that time made use of political uncertainty. Defoe switched from one side to the other, so we can sense his political view at that time, from the Whig to the Tory, and from the Tory to the Whig. He was with the Whig when it was in control, and moved to the Tory when it became in power. So he switched from one party to the other because of his uncertainty at that time. Like that age, he was uncertain of his political attitude. So again, he was uncertain about political attitude toward the Whig or the Tory. So he was sometimes with the Tory, sometimes with the Whig. Defoe was a political journalist before he turned into writing fiction. At his beginning as a writer, Defoe wanted to establish his writing as a means of living. So it was a kind of job, let's say a job. It's a kind of job. Writing is a kind of job. He wrote for the purpose or for the sake of getting some money. This is an explanation of this. Defoe wanted to establish his writing as a means of living, not for the purpose of art. He didn't write to show that he was a great writer or for the sake of writing. He wrote because he wanted to get some money to live. He had troubles in finding a publisher, but he wrote many works which achieved some money for him. He used a number of pen names, so he didn't write a lot of his writings were without an author name. He didn't write and he didn't indicate his name in his writing. For example, we have anonymous writer, or sometimes he used another name. For example, he used eyewitness. This is a name for him. Another name, T. Taylor. T. Taylor. Another name, Andrew Martin. So we have Andrew Martin. Another name, Merchant. We can see that he changed his pen name a lot, and we have other names for him. So he wrote a lot of writing without indicating his name. His political writings were widely read and made him a lot of enemies. There were a lot of enemies for Defoe because of his writing. We can sense that from his political uncertainty. If you switch from one part to the other, you can see that the other part, yes, will be your enemy in the future. So we have this kind of struggle in his life. Often he was misunderstood. He was misunderstood. Therefore, he was trying to hide his real name to be safe from his enemies. Now let's see Defoe as writer. He was productive author of the Augustan age. He was the first of the great 18th century English novelists. He was a distinguished writer even before he wrote his novels. Before he started writing novels, he was a distinguished journalist and writer. For example, when he published his poem, The True-Born Englishman, in 1701, he estimated that more than 80,000 copies were sold. Imagine this number at that time. We are talking about 18th century. We have 80,000 copies of one work. Defoe turned into a new literary path in 1719. So we have a switch, a kind of a switch from a type of writing to another type of writing. He was around 59 years old when he published Robinson Crusoe. Imagine that. He switched to another type of writing at that age. Imagine he was 59 years old. In this year, he published Robinson Crusoe. It is usually considered the first English novel. This novel is usually considered the first English novel. He also wrote many other novels after that. Defoe is considered the inventor of the English novel. He invented the English novel. Daniel Defoe was considered the first writer who didn't follow the previous protocol of storytelling. So he was different from other writers in the 17th and 18th, the beginning of the 18th century. Writers were interested in retelling stories that everyone had already heard. So they have the same kind of storytelling. They have traditional stories. They didn't change any of these stories. Defoe moved away from this tendency of retelling stories and began to create characters that were new to the literary tradition. He began to create a new form of literature, and he created new characters to introduce them in the novel. Defoe began writing narratives about characters and their life using a new technique which used literary elements similar to real life. Some critics admire the novels of Defoe, such as Rousseau. We have a great critic who is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is a great critic. He admired the works of Defoe. Who said, so we have such as Rousseau, who said that fiction was never nearer the truth. It was so close to the real life, to the truth. His fiction was so close to real life. Views against Defoe as the first English novelist. We have some critics who were against him and against the idea that he was the first English novelist. Some critics think that Defoe is not the true father of the English novel, and Robinson Crusoe was not a kind of the first novel. It was a kind of romance or other kind of literature. It was not considered a kind of novel according to some critics. Let's see the reasons behind that. Some critics say that Robinson Crusoe lacks some specific elements. This novel doesn't have many of the elements of novel. He mainly wrote under an economic motive. So they think that Defoe wrote this kind of novel for the sake of money, not for the sake of literature and art. He wrote for the sake of money. It's clear in his novel when Crusoe takes money from his dead shipmates, even when he knows it will have no use on the island. We can see this idea in his novel, as these critics consider that it is a kind of writing for the purpose of money, not for the purpose of art. Another reason, some actions need to be finished. We have a lot of actions in the novel or events which have no end at all. So according to these critics, some actions need to be finished. For example, Crusoe's relationship with Friday centers on the tasks that need to be finished, such as building the raft. We don't have any idea about the raft. After mentioning the raft, we don't have a complete idea about this. And obtaining food. Obtaining food, we don't have a complete idea about obtaining food or getting food for other characters or even for Robinson Crusoe himself. The third reason we have, there is a lack of emotional dimension in some important situation. We have a kind of lack of emotional dimension in some important situation. If you have a very important situation which requires a lot of emotions, this is not clear in Robinson Crusoe. According to these, remember, according to these critics who are against Robinson Crusoe and against Defoe as the first novelist. Dickens said, "I will venture to say that there isn't in literature a more surprising instance of an utter speaking or a word, want of tenderness and sentiment than the death of Friday." So there is a lack of emotional dimension in this novel. The fourth one, there is no psychological insight. So we have emotional dimension, now we have psychological insight. We don't have a deep psychological insight in this novel. Some critics see that it is not enough to tell only a story in its sequence of time. So it's not enough to tell a story from beginning to the end without psychological insight in this sequence of events. We have the psychology of characters. We should show the psychological insight of these characters, or one character at least. These critics think that a novel should contain other aspects in addition to the basic elements of characters, setting, and plot. So according to these critics, the novelist has to employ other aspects in his novel. They think that, but if to write a novel is to create a coherent world populated by credible people, at least one of whom dominates the main action, and then Defoe's romances or tales of adventure are indeed novels. So they think that Robinson Crusoe is a kind of romance or a tale. It's not a novel, it's not a new thing. It is traditional tale or romance which follows the traditions or the literary traditions of previous literature. Defoe's influence on fiction. Defoe's novels were in the same style as Robinson Crusoe, that of a man or woman telling his or her life story. So we have a kind of similarity between all his works, that of a man or woman telling his or her life story. We have Captain Singleton, Moll Flanders, A Journal of the Plague Year, Colonel Jack, and Roxana, came out from 1720 to 1724. These books founded the literary traditions of the English novel as a new form in its beginning. So we have a kind of foundation of this kind of writing, which is the novel. Richardson and Fielding took advantage of the new form which was set by Defoe. Phelps says in his book 50 British Novels from 1600 to 1900 that Richardson and Fielding as the two main pillars of the early English novel at opposite ends of the building. Richardson and Fielding contributed a lot in the development of the English novel. So we can see the impact of Defoe on these great novelists. There was a great impact of Defoe on the development of the English novel. During his long career as a writer, Daniel Defoe was to lead what may be the busiest, most varied life of any English writer. So his life was full of adventures, experience, a lot of troubles, a lot of business, a lot of writings. It was fully occupied. Another view, Rogers said that Defoe was a culture hero even when few of his books were read and few were still admired. So we have this idea about Defoe. He was a culture hero. Whether you accept that or you disagree or you don't admire his works, he is a culture hero. In fact, he wasn't famous for his works until long after his death. Defoe is notable for the quantity of hostile material directed against him in his lifetime. There were a lot of works which were written in order to criticize this author. We have a lot of works in literature and especially in criticism. Most of these works focus on criticizing this novelist, Defoe. Now let's see the works of this great novelist. Defoe's novels, we have around 5 novels. We have the first one, Robinson Crusoe, which was written in 1719, his most famous novel, which makes him immortal. And another work by him, we have Captain Singleton, which was written in 1720. Another one, Colonel Jack, which was written in 1722. And Moll Flanders, and the last one, Roxana, the Fortunate Mistress. Moll Flanders, a heroine. It was written in 1722 also. So we can see in 1 year he wrote 2 great works. Roxana, the Fortunate Mistress, it was written in 1724. All these works written after the age of 59. So he was 59 when he started writing novels. Other kinds of writing, Defoe wrote about 200 works of non-fiction prose, 2,000 short essays in periodical publications. Imagine that number, 2,000 short essays in periodical publications. He wrote poems such as his collection, a true collection of the writings of the author of The True-Born Englishman, which was published in 1703. It was a collection of poems and political essays. According to Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, Defoe not only invented both modern journalism and the modern novel, he has also invented the first self-help guide in modern society. For example, he wrote an essay upon project. Look at this work again. He wrote an essay upon projects in 1697, which dealt with a set of proposals or projects for improvements in the English life and society based on his own experience in the commercial world. These proposals were kinds of ideas that were making other men rich. Defoe died in 1731, but he left behind him great writing traditions in many fields, such as literature, journalism, and business. He became famous and better well known even after his death. Thank you so much. See you next lecture.